YG가 Khalsa, YGP Fateh. So our first workshop for this weekend's retreat, I titled it A Spirit of Giving. And, you know, I've actually known for a while that I had to do this workshop for this year's retreat, but I've really just been kind of putting it off for a variety of reasons, mostly because I'm lazy and have had this perpetual battle with procrastination my entire life. But partly also because at first the topic to me seemed a little overwhelming in the sense of how do we truly characterize the spirit of giving? How am I supposed to talk about this very broad topic to all of you? And you know, I got some ideas that I think have helped me out quite a bit for this workshop, particularly from Ramit Thakur, so I just want to put that out there. She helped me a lot with this and kind of getting me to at least focus on something, to sit down and really start putting this into some type of presentation for you all when I started this last week. And what I'm trying to present today is really a exploration of the variety of thoughts that have been running through my mind and all of the various themes that have gone in and out of my mind as I was trying to put this together into one simple, concise presentation. And hopefully, by the end of this somewhat broad topic, I think we can bring it together in the end to realize that the essence of this is actually very simple. So in my professional life, when I give talks, we are required to give a disclosure of by the people who accredit our talks as whether or not they are educationally worthy enough. We are mandated to kind of disclose any conflicts of interest we may have, any associations with industry or corporations or other organizations that might bias our talk, so that all the audience can be aware of what some of those conflicts or biases may be. And so, you know, to keep in the spirit of full disclosure and full honesty, I will say that I am involved in a non-profit organization called the Slund Network, which is an online giving platform aimed at bringing donors and projects and organizations together in a way to effect improved activism. And now my affiliation with the organization is not really the topic of this workshop today. And although I am more than happy to talk to anyone who's interested in it later. But really, I just want to kind of disclose that it's important to know that my bias is that while I truly don't have a spirit of giving, I am somewhat pro the idea of the slund. So you will hear that bias of being pro the slund in the course of this talk. And really, this act of giving, or the spirit of giving in our language or in our terms, we call the slund. And so I'm going to start by asking all of you, when you hear the word the slund, what does the slund mean to you? Anyway.
I just, by looking at it, if I spot it's like 10.
Okay, 10.
That's what I think of first.
Good, 10. Anything else? Any other thoughts?
Charity?
Charity, good. You can just call them out too, like that.
Community service.
Community service.
10% of income.
10% of income.
Time and money.
Time and money.
10% of gross income.
Okay, 10% of gross income. Anything else? Any other? Anything else? No other ideas? Well, when we asked a group of people what this one meant to them, this was kind of the word cloud that came about from this. The most popular answer likely being duty, charity, responsibility, seva, 10 was a big one. Commitment, needed, Vanchakana, selfless, guru, essential, donation, share, future, forgotten, community. So a variety of different images that you may think of. And you know, I will say that I had given not really this talk, but another kind of talk on the slund with some teenagers out of a local metro area for like one of these retreats that they were having, and a good percentage of the people had actually never heard of the word the slund. or knew what it meant. And I think that's kind of important as we go along and talk about what this real spirit of giving is. So this fund, what is this fund? It literally means a tenth of and refers to the act of donating 10% of one's income and one's time. And you know, a lot of times we use the word donating, or even this title of this talk, when I first come up with it, was a spirit of giving. But I think really we need to look at it more in the lines of sharing. There's a hierarchy that gets developed if you say that I am donating to you, or I am giving to you, versus we are sharing this all together. And it's something that I think, you know, just a thought to put out there to think of as we go through the rest of this workshop. But this concept of this fund, the spirit of this fund, is not unique to Sikhi. In fact, there are many other faiths and religions that practice very similar concept. The Christian concept of the tithe requires that members contribute 10% of their income, commonly to their local congregation. But how many of you have ever gone to like a Catholic hospital, worked at a, you know, like a church-related homeless shelter or food pantry?
United Way.
Even the United Way, or we're sitting right here at the YMCA campsite. A lot of these kinds of places, whole hospitals, are funded largely by grant money from various Catholic and Christian charities. And those charities and the donations and the money that comes through there is often a requirement of their congregation to give. And as a result, they have done truly numerous things, particularly in the healthcare field and in serving the underserved in inner cities. Zakat is one of the 5 pillars of Islam, and it requires the assignment. And they use the word assignment, which is another interesting word, because I think words sometimes matter. How we define words and what they kind of imbibe us with, what feelings are, kind of matter. And the Zakat requires an assignment of 2.5% to 20% of one's annual wealth for the welfare of the destitute and the needy. It's an assignment that they have. And then, you know, most noteworthy, I think, for me, is I kind of look at other communities, and it's almost inevitable that you end up comparing your community to another, which may or may not be the right thing, but it's almost inevitable that you do it. The Jewish community is also required to give 10% of their income to charity. And the American Jewish community in particular has had a lot of success in their requirement of charity and philanthropy. And, you know, just as an example, Business Week's 2006 list of the 50 most generous philanthropists included at least 15 Jewish people. And the Chronicle of Philanthropy's list of the top 50 charitable donors in 2008 included 16 Jewish people. And in 2003, a study was done that found that 24.5% of all mega donors, that's people who donated more than $10 million a year to charity, were Jewish. And so when they kind of do different studies of like the giving population and the philanthropic population, Jewish people, who really only account for 2% of the American population, actually give 30% in the total amount of volume to different charities and organizations. And you know, Jewish giving is actually not limited to only just Jewish causes. Their generosity extends to many non-Jewish related philanthropic events. So really kind of a community to look at as a stalwart in the progressive age of giving and in charity. So what is our history of this month? Where does our concept of this month come from? And I think if I can for a moment, it might be helpful just to kind of go through a short walk through history and kind of see our examples of people who truly had a spirit of giving. And what does that really mean? Because I can stand up here and we can try and use all the definitions and define, but I think we are really lucky enough that we have people in our history who just exemplified this, and just their story in itself, I think, encompasses what truly is the spirit of this month. So this Sikh woman, she was actually mentioned as a sidebar last night in one of the blog posts that were read. Mata Kidi, Guru Angad Dev Ji's wife. She became a follower of Guru Nanak Dev Ji and helped establish the concept of langar. And her role in the community, I think, is often overlooked, but I want to pause and have us all kind of truly reflect on what it means for someone to work day in and day out in making langar, and what that really means, and how much, I mean, we might call it work, but to them they probably don't think of it as work, but how much work that is. You know, if you've ever had a family of 4 or 6 or 8 come to your house for dinner, how much preparation goes into preparing that, to making them feeling at home. How much preparation goes into creating a meal that is nutritious and that satisfies the camaraderie that will be developed in that home. It's a lot of work, actually. Many people would consider it to be a lot of work. Mata Kiviji, I think we often don't really see how much of her true impact was upon the Sikh community at large, and how her true internal spirituality manifested itself in this outward giving of preparing and serving langar daily to the Guru's Sikhs. She was really the mother for many Sikhs, and if you can imagine being the wife of the Guru, followers from all around would come daily to visit the Guru, people seeking truth, people seeking guidance, people seeking solace. All of those people that came to the Guru, every one of them was always given a meal and, if needed, a place to stay. And Mata Kivi was truly one of those people that orchestrated that whole event and kind of made langar what it is today. And the door was always open to the Guru. And I think Mata Kivi is the one who allowed it to be that way, where people really felt nourished and cherished and a part of the family and a part of this community meal. And I think if we can think about for a second, what does it mean to have a community meal? What does it mean for a family to sit together and share a meal? How does that impact the society? How does that impact the family? And if we look at the Sikh community and consider it a family of sorts, how did all of these people coming together, sharing a meal, really help? And you know, I think the Gurus and Mata Kivi and many others just like her who go unnamed in our history understood the importance of sharing a meal together and having that community spirit. And you know, hundreds of years later, we can have scientific evidence, not that the Gurus knowing it is good enough, but you know, there's lots of science out there about what sharing a family meal can do for a person and their life. Psychologists and sociologists around tout that sharing a meal promotes a sense of community, family, and togetherness that aids in developing characteristics of respect, compromise, and love. A survey done in the year 2000 found that 9 to 14-year-olds who ate dinner with their families most frequently ate more fruits and vegetables and less soda and fried foods. Their diets also had higher amounts of many key nutrients like calcium, iron, and fiber. In 2008, a research study done at the Brigham Young University concluded, after they studied IBM workers, found that sitting down to a family meal helped working moms reduce tension and strain from long hours at the office. And the National Center on Addiction and Substance Abuse at Columbia University published their findings of a study looking at teens and substance abuse. And they found that compared to teens who had frequent family dinners, 5 to 7 times per week, those who had infrequent family dinners, so less than 3 times per week, were almost 4 times more likely to use tobacco, twice as likely to use alcohol, 2.5 times more likely to use marijuana, and almost 4 times likelier to say they expect to try drugs in the future. And 20% of those people would get C's or lower on their report cards, with only 9% of teens who ate frequently with their meals did this poorly in school. So, you know, these are all kind of associations. They're not cause and effect, but I think at large we can see that there is a more positive association with having a family meal, with sharing a community together and what that does. And in Sikhi, this idea of all people coming together to share a meal has many facets. It helps reduce those barriers between high caste, low caste, rich, poor. But beyond that, particularly in this day and age, it provided nutritional sustenance. I mean, food, air, water, basic necessities of life. Cannot live, physical being cannot live, absolutely cannot live without food, water, and air. So when you came to the Guru, not only did you get spiritual enlightenment and spiritual nourishment, but the actual physical nourishment that you needed to go on to continue to do your life was given to you by the Sangha. And I think this in itself gets overlooked. And I am at fault for having done this a lot of my life because, you know, I kind of grew up looking at Langar being like, well, I mean, it's not really a community kitchen. We're not serving any poor people. All the people that come to Gurdwara on Sunday, they can all afford their own dinner. They can all afford their own lunch. Like, what are this? This is not really a community thing. We need to go out into the inner city. We need to go out and serve our Langars there. And yes, we should be doing those things. But I think that we don't take away from the fact that we all sit together in a meal and that we share ideas and that we nourish our souls together, but also nourish our funds together. The relationships that are formed by people sitting together and having a meal together, I don't think can go understated. And, you know, I watched many of my aunties and uncles make Langar. I never once heard anyone think about or say or complain about how much work it was. And I've never ever heard anybody talk about how much money it cost to put on a Langar or to do a Langar for their local community. You know, earlier in May, the Wall Street Journal ran an article called Where the Food is Free. And they depicted the ins and outs of the Richmond Hill Gurdwara. So that was just one of many Gurdwaras that do things like this. But at that Gurdwara, the kitchen is open to visitors 5 a.m. to 11 p.m. every day, 7 days a week. On regular days, they serve an average of 500 people per day, and on Sundays, they serve about 1,000 people per day. There's one lady there who's 80 years old, and she comes every day to make Langar, every day, to help make food for 500 people. That is a lot of work to sit on your stand or sit from day until the evening to try and help do the seva. And why do people do this? Why do they have that pyar? Because they feel, or we should all feel, that it's doing the seva of people who are coming to the Guru, people who are coming to the Guru to seek his knowledge, right? We should do the seva because our job is to serve those. You know, I don't even know how much a meal would probably cost, but if you take it on the cheap side, one meal, let's say $4, dal, chawal, roti, dahi, about $4. If you're feeding 500 people, that's $2,000 a day. $2,000 a day that goes into the expense of just food for the community. And I will guarantee that some people, that is probably the most nutritious meal that they have that day. And even more so, and on a bigger span, if you talk to the head cooks at the Darbar Sahib in Amritsar, and if you can only imagine what this is like. And those of you who have visited Darbar Sahib, I think, can see. But I was even myself kind of floored to hear these statistics. But in Amritsar, Darbar Sahib serves 80,000 meals a day. 200,000 on the weekends, and on holidays like Guru Arjan Dev Ji's Gurpurab, Baisakhi, it can reach up to 500,000 people that are served. They have over 1,000 volunteers in their kitchen on a daily basis, and most of that food is donated. And it's largely driven by volunteers. One could possibly consider the Darbar Sahib the largest free kitchen in the world. And visitors come from all over the world to visit this place, and they are all greeted with a meal. And I don't know how many meals Mata Kiwi made for anybody. I can't even presume to guess. We haven't documented this history. But I know that Mata Kiwi served for 5 gurus and made Langar for 5 times the amount of people that would have ever come to see a guru. And it's really amazing to look and see how she touched the hearts of so many people with just a simple act of making them feel warm and welcome. And so much so was her contribution that, as said last night, she is actually the only one who is mentioned by name in the Guru Granth Sahib for her seva and her distinction. So next in our history, I want to talk about this fan, who is just a portrait rendition of, anyone know who is this? Bhai Kanhaiya. And for me personally, Bhai Kanhaiya is one of my heroes because he truly exemplified the idea that friend and foe are truly the same. And if you think about this, and I'm sure all of you have heard the story of Bhai Kanhaiya. The story goes that in the battlefields at Anandpur Sahib in 1705, he was serving water to those who were injured, whether they were of the Mughal forces or of the Sikh forces. And some Sikhs actually complained about him to the Guru. And the Guru asked him about what he was doing. And Bhai Kanhaiya Ji replied that, "I see you alone, my master, in every person. I cannot distinguish between the Turks, the Sikhs, and you." And how amazing this concept is, to think that you would serve the very people that are trying to kill your brothers and your sisters. I mean, just take that in for a second. What does that really mean? You know, I'm in the medicine field. And, you know, sometimes you get all, your ego starts to build and you think, oh, you know, I work in this underserved clinic, I'm so great, blah, blah, I give all this, like, great care to all these people who can't get it, right? But I'll tell you, in an underserved clinic, the people that walk in with their Gucci purses and their iPhones that they're paying $100 a month for, and whatever, you know, whatever brand name thing, item, clothing that they could have that you know is more expensive than even I'm affording, and why are they in my free clinic? Those people annoy me. As patients, those kind of people annoy me. And that's so shameful. What would Baikanayiji think of me? That I would be annoyed by such a simple thing. And here are people that are trying to challenge your very existence, your very life, and yet in them, he sees the Guru. How is that possible? How is that kind of pyar that he will truly serve them with his entire breath? Those very same people. Could you imagine if someone killed your brother, your sister, your mother, your father, and you saw them lying on the street and they were injured? Would you really try and work to save them? Would I really try and work to save them? I mean, think about that. I have children now. If somebody tried to hurt my children, I'm not sure I would have that kind of compassion or that type of spirit of giving. But Baikanayiji does. That embodies the idea of the spirit of giving in our history. And then one of my very favorite heroes from personal time, or favorite heroes from more recent times, Bhagat Pooran Singh. And for those of you who don't know who Bhagat Pooran Singh is, he truly lived a life of giving everything that he had, both in time and possessions, to those who most needed it. The destitute, the handicapped, the extreme impoverished. And he helped create the founding of Pingolwara, which was a home to these people. But I think even more amazing, if you read Bhagat Pooran Singhji's story, is not so much even the founding of Pingolwara, right? This contribution to society of such a place is enormous, particularly in that community of India. It parallels many other great achievements of what is recognized throughout the world, whether it's Mother Teresa or whoever else that's renowned as Nobel Peace Prize winning type of people. But if you look at how Bhagatji took care of his wards, even before that institution was made, that really is the most profound thing if you think about it. Bhagat Pooranji had nothing. He had nothing at all, really. Nothing from the standards of what we would consider, yet he had so much to give. How is that possible? You know, during partition when he lived, he crossed many generations, but at the time of partition, things in Punjab were in such a disarray, right? Like people, millions of people affected by partition of India. And people displaced from their homes, people without water, people without food, people living in refugee camps. Well, could you imagine if you are disabled or if you're handicapped, you can't walk, what that leaves you with? What kind of support is there for you? What kind of social status is there for you? Nothing. So Bhagat Pooranji collects these people along the way that have no other place to go, and he has no home himself to put them in, but he finds places underneath train stations, underneath the arches of different areas, and he puts his wards there, and then he goes out to find food, clothing, basic necessities. And he himself didn't have anything. He could have kept it all for himself, and yet he shared all of it. Shared all of it with the people who needed it even more than him. I mean, when the people ask me for like $5 or $10, I just think, Bhagat Pooran Singh Ji had nothing. Yet his giving was overwhelming to so many people who their lives were completely changed. This person who's sitting, that he has with him, he called Pyara. Pyara was a cripple who couldn't get around anywhere, and probably the first ward that Bhagat Pooran Singh Ji had. Bhagat Pooran Singh Ji took such good care of him. This kind of man, Pyara Ji, could never have survived for a long period of time all on his own, and yet he outlived Bhagat Pooran Singh Ji. He was still alive when Bhagat Pooran Singh Ji passed. That is how good Bhagat Pooran Singh Ji took care of him and his health. And this very act of carrying him around everything, everywhere he went, is a true testament to his love for Waheguru's creation. And this is the true spirit of giving. This is the true Dasman in our history. So I guess that moves us on a little bit to our giving and what does that mean for us? And you know, I kind of alluded to it earlier, but giving part of our income, and it's established in this fund as a tenth of, or as a 10% of our time and efforts, is a practice of recognizing that truly everything is in WIRE. And you know, I talked a little bit about how it's hard to use these words like donation and giving because it does put a social hierarchy around it. And maybe thinking of it more like, this isn't really mine to give anyways, right? I was given all of this stuff that I have, and all of the things, all of my time, all of my health, all of my money. So I'm just sharing it with those who don't. And you know, this principle of the fund is practiced by many Sikhs still today. It just doesn't seem to be as prominent as before. And I think we all really need to try and think of reigniting this conversation about this fund and encouraging each other to give back. Because we really need a sangat of people to encourage us in this direction. You know, there's a famous saying that says, Garib Damu Guru Ki Golak, and it's very common amongst the Sikhs, and that we need to really work hard to help those who cannot achieve on their own, and remind ourselves of the importance this fund has had in our history. So how do we reignite this conversation of this fund? You know, I really think after I had done that one talk with those kids, that we really need to start talking about it with our Sikh youth again, and kind of understanding what is this fund and making it part of our regular conversation. Nobody ever really likes to talk about how much are you giving, how much are you donating, how much of your time are you spending here, because intrinsically in this fund is a concept of humility, and it's not something that gets broadcasted. But it is something that we need to start talking about so that it becomes part of the fabric of our conversation. And we need to encourage and support activists within our community by providing a reliable stream of funds and strong support system talented Sikhs and organizations. We can enable them to do the work that they are doing already so well. And sometimes we may not have a skill set. Sometimes we may not be able to do something. But then we need to encourage those around us to do what they are doing. So if we really want to be serious about this conversation, if we want to really start this conversation about the slum, I had to look at myself and try and share with you what were some of my barriers and what are the questions that I have about why I am not having this spirit of giving. Why am I not being able to do this slum? And so these were some of the questions that I asked myself. Do I lack money? Do I lack time? Do I lack a skill set? Do I lack an organization? And if everyone can just ask themselves those questions and think about it to themselves for a minute, we'll get back to these questions in the end. But these are the questions that I asked myself. Because really honestly, if we want to have a conversation together, we all need to start with what am I myself doing? And then how can we together go forward? So please think about these questions while we move on to the next part of the workshop, and then we'll get to this part in a second. But the next part of our workshop is going to be a project-based section here. And what each of you are going to do is split up into 5 groups, and I'm going to even let you pick kind of which group you're in, kind of in the sense of within reason, about 7 or 8 people per group. Each group will be assigned a current, everyday type of problem that is existing. And your group project is to try and come up with a solution to that problem, or at least a way to engage that problem in improving the situation. And so as an example, you'll each be given a task with a bunch of questions, but I will run through a sample project that I did. It doesn't have to be so detailed, it's really just to kind of get the general sense of a possibility. So, for example, if we took the problem of fuel poverty. So fuel poverty is an idea, or it's a situation where people have to spend more than 10% of their yearly income in heating or cooling their home. And fuel poverty is a growing problem, particularly, well, everywhere in the world, but particularly in the United States with the growing economic crisis. In cold places in northern states, there is significant risk for below freezing temperatures and people trying to decide if they should spend money on food or spend money on heating their house. In really hot places, there's increased heat stroke and heat exhaustion, and in fact, many times the idea of fuel poverty is actually leading to death, particularly in the infants and in the elderly, who can't really compensate for very cold and very hot temperatures. You know, I think about fuel poverty and I think, gosh, I never in my life had to think about whether or not I was going to be warm or cold. You just turned up the thermostat if it was cold, and you turned down the thermostat if it was too hot. But there are millions of people who don't live with that kind of luxury. So let's say this is our problem, fuel poverty. So what would be the goal of my project? If I were to construct a project, my goal that I would decide is that I wanted to bring heat, so I'm going to pick a local project because I think sometimes it's easier to work locally, and I don't want anyone to feel like any of these problems are so unable to be accomplished in any type of small improvement. So in this project, I'm going to target homes in Michigan, trying homes in Michigan, and hopefully there's a greater donor. So what is my going to be? So I've decided I'm going to go say 5K, Oliver and Lee. Money will go towards this organization in Michigan that's a nonprofit called THAW, and it's an independent organization that tries to help fill the gaps that the government assistance programs don't have, and providing heat and energy assistance to various families. Over the course of their inception since 1985, they distributed more than $102 million in assistance to over 155,000 Michigan households. And just last year alone, they gave assistance to 12,000 Michigan households who would not have done as well, nearly as well without their help. Recipients of this organization often go to the elderly, unemployed, underemployed, and disabled individuals. So I've decided I'm going to orchestrate this 5K and get everybody involved, and the money will go to this organization. So how many volunteer hours are we going to need to do this project? Estimating about 120 hours over 8 weeks. There will probably be a need for at least 3 or 4 core volunteers to orchestrate the advertising, the getting of donors, getting the permits, setting up the websites, and getting people to come on into the event. And at least 20 volunteers or more needed for the actual event day itself. And how much money are we going to need to put this on? So target financial support that we're going to need to actually just put on the 5K itself is about $8,000. That includes things like advertising costs, permits, water, Gatorade, t-shirts, tents, health-related equipment, prizes. Even oftentimes a hidden cost is computer-related cost. To set up a website can sometimes be somewhat expensive. So it's going to take at least around $8,000 to put this event on. And how will I evaluate whether or not the project at its completion did any good? Did it do what the goals set itself out to do? And so we will have a target of 1,000 people with a $20 entrance fee and hopefully raise $20,000 to help in Michigan assistance homes. And so that'll be our target range. And then the idea of the project would be to go out in the community, get everybody aware of the problem, inspire them to walk, run with us in a 5K, and in the process bring out awareness to this problem. So creating this project idea took me about 20 or 30 minutes to construct. So what we're going to do is we have 5 different topics, and I want you to try and pick a topic that you maybe feel a little bit more passionate about. I think that sometimes helps in trying to come up with a simple project. And try and just come up with a simple, tangible project that could potentially be done. It doesn't have to be something so astronomical. Use the resources that are out there or the ideas that are out there to partner with others if that helps, and try and come up with at least a general strategy. And then you as a group can then present to the rest of us what kind of strategy you came up with. And we will do this for about 20 minutes or so, okay? So the topics that we have, maybe you just grab those post-it notes and we can put them on the different tables, and then you can circulate to the table that you'd like to go. The 5 topics that I've picked for today, and you'll each get a info sheet with some information about the problem, and then 5 targeted questions to answer for your group. So one is obesity, one is clean water, one is hunger, one is domestic violence, and the other one is bullying. So we'll put one problem sheet on each table, and you can go to the table that you would like. If there's already so many people at that table, and it was a topic you were really passionate about, see if you can bring yourself to be passionate about another one of these topics. Okay, any questions about what the project is? Where we're going to go? I'll give them the background info. Okay,
So hunger is here.
Great. We only have a couple more minutes before they're getting the lunch stuff started, and then we can continue the discussion of this hopefully in the evening time. Does that sound okay with everybody?
Yes.
Okay.
They have some.
So, and I think, we'll get some of this evening, I think, as I've been walking around kind of seeing some of the projects that have formulated and hearing some of the discussions that happened, but I essentially went through this litany of questions to make the slide to try and give everybody an example of what the exercise was. I wasn't actually going into it trying to plan a 5K or trying to, truly help fuel poverty. I was using it as an example. But as I started writing it through, I thought to myself, well, why couldn't we do this? Why couldn't we, as a member of the Rochester Sick Board, I get a few people together and do this project every year and raise money to support heating for a couple hundred homes or something, walk it, push a stroller. But I started thinking about, well, this is not actually that hard. I mean, in concept, people do this kind of thing all the time. There's lots of resources. And sometimes you can do things that people are doing all the time, but the point is that maybe this will get us to keep doing things. And I think as we go through our projects and as you have discussion today, remember it's not such a far-reaching idea. Things like getting together, having an informal discussion have spurred on things. Great organizations like Jakara, Sick Coalition, SALDEF, these organizations that are doing lots of work for the community, they often stemmed out of an idea that 4 or 5 people had just sitting around together trying to solve a problem that existed, right? In Toronto, out of the Toronto Sick Retreat, discussions they had instilled the idea of the Save a Food Bank, and now it's an up and running true venture that's happening. I mean, don't underestimate the power of what a conversation between 4 or 5 passionate people can do, and what that can mean. And so, it was a good exercise for me, and when I was really just trying to make an example out of something, to try and make me feel like, well, if we're going to converse about this concept of this month, if we're going to talk about really supporting the global community with our money and with our efforts, then what's stopping us from doing it? And what's stopping me from doing it? So if we can go back to those questions that I had kind of brought up before we started this project, and I think again we'll talk about it more this evening, but so my first question of, do I lack money? Well, no. I make many choices with the money I have, I buy many things that I probably don't need to buy. I have many things that are beyond the basic necessities of life. So do I lack money? No. Do I lack time? No. Not really. I need to just prioritize my time. I probably waste a lot of time watching repeat episodes of NCIS at night and playing Scramble with friends on my phone. And if I just prioritize my phone, you can ask him, he'll tell you I waste a lot of time doing that. Maybe I could actually go out and do some things. Do I lack a skill set? Not really. It doesn't take a large skill set to do lots of great things. And if I do lack a skill set in something that I might feel passionate about, I can go out and learn that skill set. Or I can find someone else who has that skill set and we can team up, make an initiative to try and create something good or do something. Do I lack an organization? No, we have the entire Sick Month at our disposal. We have an entire organization of people who are passionate and willing to proceed. There's a girl in this audience actually who touched me a long time ago, because when I was a younger girl, and she was even much younger than me, maybe about 9 or 10, I was doing a talk about community service, and at that time I was doing some side work for what is now called SALDEF. And in a camp gathering, I had talked about what we were doing. And just on her own, this 10-year-old girl came up to me later on that day and gave me a $50 bill. And she said, take this for the organization that you're doing, because I know that this organization is going to do good work. How does a 10-year-old girl have that kind of insight to think that this money isn't that valuable to me, it could go somewhere else to do a project that's initiative? And it's amazing. It struck me at that time because our organization, our fund, is filled with people with this kind of spirit. We just need to open our eyes and see them. We just need to see that the Mapakiwis, the Baikaneyas, the Pagasuransingjis, they live amongst us in many different ways. People use many of their different skill sets, their money, their time, to do lots of great things for the community at large. If we want to have this kind of thing, this spirit of giving, if any of my answers or any of your answers are no, if even one of the answers is no, then what is it that's stopping us from being like that? And I was watching this TED Talk. I don't know how many of you know what TED Talks are, but essentially like a group of really like up in the front, innovative, technology, philanthropists. I mean, all the bigwigs in the world kind of get together and do these talks. And a lot of them are inspiring about what they're doing, where they're coming from. And this talk, I'm going to just show a small clip, and it's kind of a bridge of 2 parts of his talk because it was a much longer talk, 20 minutes, and we just kind of cut out and we put the 7 minutes of the best parts of it, I think, together. Kind of illustrated for me as I watched this, what is the true barrier that's stopping me from having this giving spirit? Why do I not have this spirit of truly giving, this one that has been incorporated into our history and into the fabric of even our barns? So I'm going to play a little bit for you. His name is Sasha Dichter. I don't know if I'm actually pronouncing his name right, but he is actually one of the business project directors for an organization called Acumen. Acumen? Is that the name? I think it's called Acumen. It's a venture capital company that is doing something called impact investing, where they invest in certain companies and products that are meant to help the underserved and the poor, and they target places in India, Pakistan, and East Africa. And he does that as his day job. But this was a little segment of what he was talking about that more had to do with just his personal life. So I'll let him do the talking because it really impacted me when I heard it.
Now, I began to understand this a lot better about a year ago in December, when I made a mistake. So I live in Westchester County. I take the MTA train to and from work. Anybody else? MTA? Thank you. So all of you know, it's a relentless schedule. The MTA train runs like clockwork. Now, I rush home every day, and at the end of the day, at the end of the workday, I've been known to stop conversations mid-sentence. Got a train to catch. And I didn't think anybody really noticed, and then a friend of mine, a close colleague, mentioned that she had very quietly started calling me Buzz Lightyear. Only apparently, instead of to infinity and beyond, I was saying, hey, I got to catch the 6:20 train. Now, in fairness, I think you might rush home too if you wanted to see these 2 characters. These are my kids. That's Jonah. He's a Jedi in training. Zoe will someday be a great ballerina. So it was December 8th, 2009, and I was on the S train, looking at my iPhone as I normally am, counting the minutes that I had left. Only this time, somebody asked me for money. And I did what I normally do, and what I bet you do too, pretty often. I said no. Why? Well, that's what I do in these situations, right? It's not the smart thing to do to give to a beggar on the street. Only this time, I realized I had made a mistake, and that I needed to do something about it. So the next day, I announced on my blog a generosity experiment, and for all of you looking to commit to things, I encourage you to announce them publicly before you're sure whether or not it's a good idea. The generosity experiment was very easy and very simple. For the next 30 days, I would say yes to everyone who asked. Every beggar on the street, every musician, and every nonprofit. Now, some people loved this idea, and others didn't. The people who didn't like the idea generally said something along the lines of, is this the smartest way to give? Wouldn't it be smarter to give the money to a homeless shelter? Well, to this I had 2 responses. First, I honestly think that's a false choice. Whether I give money to someone who's standing right there in front of me has nothing to do with whether at the end of the day I write a check to a homeless shelter. But secondly, and probably most importantly, this wasn't about the smartest and best gift I could give. This was about me. I wanted to stop saying no. You know, as someone who works at a groundbreaking nonprofit, as a fundraiser, as someone who thinks that the world's broken and in need of healing, and as someone who wanted to tap into my own motivations for doing this work, I felt like I needed to break this habit. I felt like what was going on was that I was hiding behind what was smart, and it was keeping me from doing what was right. So what happened? So, well, actually, before that, I'd like to ask you all a question. How many times do you think that somebody asks you for money? Do you think it's once a day? Maybe once every 2 days? Maybe you say no 4 out of 5 times, or 9 out of 10 times. But pretty soon the no's start to add up. Pretty soon no becomes who you are and what you do when somebody comes to you asking for help. And I wanted to practice saying yes, and what I realized is I needed a new habit and a new reflex. When I want to teach my kids to say please and thank you, it requires repetition and it requires practice. And I realized I'd never once sat down in my life, despite my commitment to this work in this sector, and said, I want to practice being more generous. So what happened? Well, I did give to everyone on the street and all sorts of nonprofits, all the ones who were emailing me with the holiday campaigns, maybe some of your organizations. And what started to happen was that I started to feel like a generous person. And I started to realize that if I want the world to be more open and more action-oriented and more generous, then I have to be more open and more action-oriented and more generous. Now, I'll admit, I didn't feel good about every single gift I gave, and I'm upset that he left because this guy had the nerve to come up to me near the end of the month and ask me for $5 because he knew I had to say yes. But more seriously, I started to understand generosity in a new way, and as a fundraiser, I started to become more effective because I realized and learned and understood in a different way that the smartest and the best philanthropists, the most effective ones, they lead with generosity. That's their starting point. And what I think has happened in the nonprofit sector, especially recently, is that the knock is that there's not enough accountability, right? And I think that that's probably true, but at the same time, I think the pendulum can swing too far in the other direction. And we can start to think that the best giving of all is the most hard-headed. It was March of 2010. It was a few months after the generosity experiment, and lo and behold, there's another guy on the train. He didn't seem well. I'd never seen him before. He clearly had diabetes. He said he had just gotten out of the hospital, and he had prescriptions to fill, and he needed money. I stood up, and I gave that guy $20. Now, $20 isn't much money, really, but I promise you, in that exact situation, it certainly feels like a lot. And I'm positive if it hadn't been for this generosity experiment, I never would have done that. I never would have done it if I hadn't decided in advance how I was going to behave in that situation and letting that decision in advance inform my actions. Now, of course, I'm never going to know if the money that I gave to that guy made a difference. And I know that all of you, just like I in my day job, are going to ask a lot more tough questions before giving money to someone. There's a risk involved in taking that leap. I think that what we forget too often in the nonprofit sector is that philanthropy is about risk-taking. Because of the kind of capital that we have, and because we're solving problems that have never been solved before, we have the flexibility to take risks that others won't take. And what I encourage all of you to do is to take these risks with asking as many tough questions as you can, being as tough as you can, being as hard-nosed as you can, as much of a business attitude as you can have. But at the same time, please be as generous as you can be. Thanks.
When I watched this, I was really touched because for me it kind of answered that question to me as to why I had this barrier. And in some ways it answered the question, but it also made, it also made the answer really simple. Hold on, sorry. And that practice really makes perfect. It really is so simple. If we want to cultivate this spirit of giving within us, it's a discipline. It's somebody's namdikamai, right? It is the form of namaskar that many people use, but it takes a discipline, it takes a practice. We're not born with the spirit of giving, per se. It takes doing daily actions, daily things that kind of try and create this spirit of inside that projects to the outside. And you know, it really comes back to that common force within our faith of meaty and beaty, in the sense that these outward disciplines that we have of Islam, the activism, the community projects, all of the different organizations that exist, they can only be sustained for as long as the internal portion, the beaty part of us, is truly that of a giving spirit, where our nature is truly giving. And much like this man said, nature is developed when we do a certain practice of disciplines. We practice certain disciplines that may not mean something to us right now. We may just do random acts of kindness. We may just, lend the old lady a hand who needs directions or walk her to her car. Or we may just, at some point, just feel guilty about the poor child's face who's dying of starvation and donate the $5 when they ask you at the grocery store, right? Like we may just start with these actions that don't have a lot of internal capacity behind it, but we do them because we're guilted into them. We do it because our friends are also doing it, so we just do it, right? But in order to make our spirit, our nature, to be that of a giving spirit, we need to practice it. And as we practice it, it becomes our habit. And as something becomes our habit, it becomes our nature. And as something becomes our nature, it becomes who we are. And that's how people like Mata Kiwi, like Paikunayaji, who could truly see no difference between friend and foe, to people like Bhagat Puran Singh, who had nothing and gave everything, truly existed. They practiced it. They did it every day. In the beginning, even when it didn't mean anything, they just did it. And so, sometimes you find inspiration from many different things, and this guy kind of helped me solve this problem that I was facing. I'm still a long way. There's a lot of practice that I think I know I have to do. And I'm hoping that this evening, when we have the conversations about the different projects, we can kind of have a discussion and you guys can share also where we all are going with our this fund on many different levels. If we just start $1 a day, at some point it might become 10%. The whole point is to have the discussion. I started working back when I was like 16. I worked in the Sears lingerie department, fitting 60-year-old ladies for their bras. And now I'm an OB/GYN, but in any event, I made like whatever, $6.50 an hour, worked 10 hours a week, made $65 a week. Never once in my life did I think that I owed $6.50 actually back to the community. It never even crossed my mind. But if every teenager who's 16 years old, who has a job, and gives $6 a week to a cause, think about what could be accomplished. Barack Obama's campaign, while he had many mega million dollars, was touted in the news reports as being this campaign of grassroots, right? Of like these college kids who were giving $25, $50, and the millions of dollars that got raised for his campaign. Well, if all of us just did $5 a week or whatever, if we taught our young people to actually do this kind of thing, just think of the magnitude of what we could do for the global community at large. And one of Mandeep's friends who actually worked with him at work once, she was of the Jewish faith, and they did these things called tzedakah boxes when they were little kids at their Sunday Jewish school or whatever. And these little kids who just have an allowance of like whatever, $2 a week, they had to come every week with their box filled with however many cents that they put in it from that week. And with that money, over the course of the year, they planted all these trees in like areas that needed the greenery and needed the shade and were better for the environment. So little children were being taught from a young age about the importance of giving and giving back. And if you start that discipline, if you start that practice so early in life, just think what we could be like 20 years or 30 years of that kind of practice. And for those of us that are just starting now, there's still so much time for us to practice this. And I'm hoping that being together, we can all kind of come to these discussions because it really does take a sangat of people to make this kind of thing happen. And so I will end with a quote from my hero that I think speaks for itself, from Bhagat Puran Singh. If you cannot love and serve that which you see, how can you love and serve that which you cannot behold within your arms? Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki